Hello and welcome to Veritas Group's video series, where we meet to discuss the many nuances of climate action and sustainability planning. I'm Kim Morrow, Director of Climate Planning and Resilience at Veritas Group, and today I'm really excited to speak with my amazing colleague, Belina Bentlich. Belina has been with Veritas for 2.5 years, and as an associate, she helps clients reduce their negative environmental impacts and increase their positive social, environmental, and financial impacts. Belina is originally from Indiana and started working at Veritas Group when she lived in Omaha. She now lives in San Pedro, California, and she's one of 2 on our team who are on the West Coast. Climate planning is a key part of her work with us, and she and I have worked side by side on 2 giant climate action plan projects at this point, and we have lived to tell about it. Welcome, Belina.
All right, thanks, Kim. Happy to be here.
Great to have you. Okay, Belina, I want to start with a little fun question for you. And my question is, how many versions of a strategy list does it take to make a climate action plan?
That is a wonderful question, Kim. And I would say it depends on what the client needs. But in the case of Salem, it took just over 20 different versions. So it was a lot of strategies, lots of great ideas, took some refinement, lots of back and forth. Yeah. It
was a long process, but we made it to the end and turned out a really good product. Yeah. Okay, well, we would like to tell you, our esteemed guests and viewers, a little bit about our Salem Climate Action Plan project that the 2 of us have been working on for a 1.5 years now. And we recently released the final draft to the public. And so we wanted to just take a moment to reflect on this project, what we've been through, and tell you a little bit about it. So, Belina, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I thought a good first question might be for you, Kim, to tell us, how did this project come to be? What does that initial interest look like from a client? How do we respond? So yeah, how did this start?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the city of Salem issued an RFP in May of 2020 asking for a climate action plan, and we developed a scope of work and a proposal that met their needs. We were chosen for an interview, so we interviewed. It was all virtual, and they actually took a really creative approach to the interview where they wanted us to kind of play act as if we were holding a status meeting, which was kind of fun. And I guess it worked because we got the project. So that started off in July of 2020. And one interesting thing that happened shortly after that is the city council went ahead and set their own greenhouse gas reduction goals. So they officially passed a resolution aiming for a 50% reduction in GHG emissions by 2035 and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So that became kind of the guardrails of our process. And so then we started work on our planning process. And we had designed a planning process around our 4-part strategic planning process. So the first part started with visioning, where we brought a group of people together to envision what a climate smart city of Salem in the year 2050 might look like. What would that look like, smell like? What would it involve? How would people move around? What would people buy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we got some great results from that process. Then we moved into step 2, which was the vulnerability assessment. And that's where we looked carefully at the climate impact projections for the city and region around Salem. And we interviewed a ton of people. Belina did the bulk of that work, interviewing a lot of people to really more deeply understand some of the climate impacts they've already been feeling and how those might become exacerbated in the future. Then we moved on to step 3, which was strategy development. And that was the longest and most involved phase, where we really worked on developing hundreds of strategies to actually help the city achieve their emission reduction goals. And then the 4th step of the process was implementation planning, where we assisted the client in kind of mapping out the near term, middle term, and longer term strategies to implement for success. So, Belina, can you tell us a little bit about the people who were involved in this project?
Yeah, and thanks for laying out the process. Really great process. And you touched on some of the people, but we had a task force of about 40 different members throughout the Salem community that represented sectors, not just from city staff, but local businesses, community groups, nonprofits. We really wanted to include people from all over the city engaged in different types of work and working with all different groups of people in the city. So that was a task force, again, about 40 different people. And knowing that even though we wanted that cross section of the community, a task force doesn't represent everyone. So another key group of people were community members themselves. So we did a lot of public outreach. So anytime that we had a task force workshop or there was an important milestone, we were also engaging the public around the similar topic. So when we were setting that vision that you mentioned, we were working with task force members, city staff, and members of the public. And just a lot of great expertise in the region. So wonderful climatologists in the region, emergency response managers, the people who work on the various utilities in the area who are striving for resilience, and people who work on water resources. So we can see changing climate in a lot of different ways. We often think about temperatures, but there's also changes to rainfall events. So having people who understand what local rainfall events look like and what that means for businesses and homes was really important. So that's just a snapshot of some important people that we worked with. Really grateful for all of their expertise and dedication and passion and collaboration. It's hard to work with people in your own community sometimes, but there was a lot of great collaborative energy and trust, and it was great to see. So Kim, I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit where we are? I know you said we released the draft to the public, but are there any other things going on that people should know about for the process?
Yeah, we gave a presentation to the city council in September, which I believe is publicly available now, where we kind of recapped the process up to that point. And then about a month later, in mid-October, we released the preliminary draft of the climate action plan. And then on November 19th, we released what is referred to as the final draft, and that included some revisions, especially to the greenhouse gas emissions forecasting. So that is the version that's out in the public right now, and we are currently awaiting the city council to vote on it. We're hoping that that vote will be scheduled in January and that the plan will be officially adopted. So it's an exciting time, and Belina and I are breaking out the champagne a little bit in our homes. So Belina, there were a couple of things about this project that were unique. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Sure. You touched on this briefly, but I think one of the main things that was unique about this climate action planning process was, due to the current pandemic, everything was virtual. So from that initial interview with city staff, that was all virtual. All of the workshops were entirely on Zoom. We streamed them via YouTube so that people could watch either live or at their leisure. So just having an entirely online platform, as a lot of people doing all kinds of work have had to adjust during the pandemic, we had to adjust as well, figure out how do we make a 3-4 hour workshop online engaging. So that was a lot of fun. And again, just some more gratitude for everybody who participated. Staring at a screen isn't the same as if we were in the same room. So people really put their whole selves into that virtual work. So the pandemic virtual was one. Some other interesting points were that as we were describing climate impacts of the region that could be experienced in the future, the people of Salem were actually living through large climate impact weather events. So we saw last fall, fall fire season, there were wildfires in the region. And so that displaced a lot of people living in surrounding areas around the city of Salem. There was severely unhealthy air quality. And so that gave us an insight into what emergency response looks like, because you want to protect people from the unhealthy outdoor air quality. But again, it was during the pandemic, people needed to be inside. So managing all of these different factors to keep people safe was huge. And then also earlier this year, there were some severe ice storms, which for the region were a little bit unusual. So seeing how people could respond to ice storms and keeping safe on the roads, staying warm. And then more recently, there were some extreme rainfall events, and flooding is historically typical for the region, but because of new intense rainfall events, some areas that weren't used to flooding had some flooding. And then there were some areas such as parks where people experiencing homelessness were living. And so this was an interesting piece to hold up and highlight for the city of Salem to show their adaptive capacity, because the city is so great at knowing where their residents who aren't living inside are at any given time. They knew that there would be folks in these low-lying areas. They were able to let people know there's going to be some rainfall events. We need to get you out of here. So that was pretty unique, I think, and unfortunate to live through the impacts of climate change while you're doing a climate action plan, but it really highlighted the significance, the importance, and the urgency of doing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. It probably brought it home to people how important this work was. And if they weren't paying attention to climate change before, it probably got a lot of people's attention.
Yeah, I think you're right.
One thing, you mentioned just now the impact that some of that flooding had on people who are unsheltered in Salem. And so that's a good segue to my next question. Can you talk about how we incorporated a climate justice framework into the project?
Sure thing. And it really took multiple different approaches. So one way that we approach climate justice was first thinking through what should this task force look like. So making sure that we had folks on the team who represented different areas of the city and different communities. And then in these workshops, making sure that we gave space to allow people to voice any ideas, questions, concerns about equity throughout the process, especially in terms of engagement. So we also built a public engagement plan. And part of that plan had to address, because everything was online, how do we, one, provide access to the online engagement? How do we also, when people have access, make sure that they are accommodated? So we know that there's different levels of ability with online engagement, so catering to different needs. And then also relying on key people in the city of Salem who know where to go to meet people. So we can't just post things online and assume that everyone's going to find that. So making sure we worked with the right people to know where to go, who to connect with, and what type of materials resonate with folks. So that means also not everyone responds to a flyer. So making sure that there's an ability for radio ads in specific languages, making sure that not everything was just provided in English. So those are kind of process approaches to incorporating environmental justice with plans and people, but then also looking forward towards implementation. We've also recommended that the city adopt equity criteria to evaluate how the climate action plan will advance equity and make sure that all residents in Salem are safe and have access to the benefits that will come from the plan. In one of those approaches too, not just in measuring equity, but we've also recommended that anytime a certain strategy is implemented, that priority populations, priority areas of Salem should be at the forefront. So to put it bluntly, making sure that a richer, wealthier side of Salem isn't getting a new park before another neighborhood that maybe hasn't had attention or new resources, that area should get that first. So those are a few different ways, always ongoing work to do more and to do better.
Yeah. And I think the task force, some of the people in the task force knew a lot about climate justice already, and other people learned a lot through the process. So I think there was a good kind of level setting of how important it is to prioritize equity when doing this kind of work.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, Kim, I've got a question for you. I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about greenhouse gas emissions when talking about a climate action plan. And with this particular project, there was a lot of analysis that went into forecasting. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the greenhouse gas forecasting and analysis that we did.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an important part of this project. So Salem, like most cities, had three main categories of emissions from transportation, electricity, and natural gas. And so we did three forecasts. We actually did more than that, but that's a long story. So we did a baseline forecast that just showed how the emissions are likely to change over time if Salem basically didn't do anything. And that showed the impacts of increasing energy efficiency, increased emissions reductions that are required by new Oregon laws. It modeled things like increasing adoption of electric vehicles, et cetera. So those are kind of things going on in the context around Salem. And that baseline forecast showed that even if Salem didn't do anything, there would be a 47% decrease in emissions by 2050. So that was interesting, and that formed our baseline. And then, but that obviously doesn't meet their goal, right, of becoming net zero by 2050. So then we did a scenario one model where we looked at what it might look like if Salem took a lot of climate action. And in that model, we took 10 emissions reduction assumptions, things like what would happen if Salem increased its energy efficiency even more? What would happen if it used solar power to a large extent in the city? What would happen if transit ridership increased significantly? So that model showed that emissions would decline by 65% by 2050. So that's a big improvement, but it's still not meeting that goal of net zero by 2050. So then we did a third model. And in the final model, we looked at what would happen if Salem took even more climate actions. So we modeled 10 more assumptions, things like, what would it look like if there were no remaining fossil fuels at all? What would it look like if Salem had achieved zero waste? What if Salem had zero emissions coming from their bus fleet? What if there were no more internal combustion engine vehicles on the road? And so in that model, we kind of forced it to go to zero. So in that model, it did achieve 100% reduction in emissions by 2050. But it also showed that achieving that goal is going to be exceedingly tough to achieve. And that was kind of the goal of the process. Everyone needed to kind of have a clear picture of where we're headed and also how challenging it will be, and some really tough choices that are going to have to be made to achieve the goals. But what's great is that Salem has a clear path for making progress now. It is going to be a challenge, but they have the particular benefit of so much happening in the Oregon regulatory context. There are really important executive orders that have been passed by the Oregon governor. There have been a whole suite of laws passed by the Oregon legislature this year and in previous years. And that kind of context creates uniformity, alignment, accountability, and scale for everyone working on climate action in Oregon. And I have to say, as someone living in Nebraska, I'm kind of jealous. It's pretty awesome. But our climate action plan recommends 183 strategies ultimately to help Salem achieve their goals. So they're definitely off to a great start. And we're proud of the work that they've done. So as we wrap up, Belina, I had a question to pose to both of us. What are you most proud of in this project?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to choose just one thing. I think I just want to say quickly with the modeling, that's hugely helpful to put it in context. If we were to do nothing, here's where we'll be. If we made some improvements here's where we would be. If we want to meet our goal, it's going to be really hard. And I think that framing is incredibly helpful. And on that front, I think what I'm most proud of is everything that we did to help guide the client, guide the city, our key points of contact. There were lots of meetings. There's a lot going on. And I'm just proud of the fact that we know, and a lot of people on the task force know what it takes to create a climate action plan. They know the strategies, but to customize it, to make it appropriate for a certain city, for certain people, for certain environments, that really customization is what I'm proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. All the work we do is completely customized, right, to each of our clients. And that's really the only way do it. And we're proud of that.
Yeah.
would say
What about you?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I'm most proud of is just the way that we gathered so much information over the course of 18 months. And it was kind of like we had like 100 tentacles out there, like absorbing information from all these different stakeholders and partners and experts. And we were able to synthesize it pretty seamlessly into this final document, into this final strategy list. And I'm really proud of the way that we were able to accomplish that and create a document that's going to be really valuable for years to come for the city of Salem.
Great.
All right. Well, to our viewers, I want to say that if you'd like to see Salem's draft climate action plan, please go to salemclimateactionplan.com. You can find all the information about the project there. And I'd like to thank everyone watching. If you have not developed a climate action plan or a net zero emissions pathway yet, and you are interested in learning more, we have developed a step-by-step guide that can help you get started on your own planning process. So go to veritasgroup.com and check out our free downloadable called How to Create a Climate Action Plan. You can also watch another video like this on that very topic that my colleague Craig Moody and I recorded a few months ago. To see that, just go to the Veritas Group Facebook page and scroll through the video section till you see the one called How to Create a Climate Action Plan. So Belina, thank you again for the great conversation. Thank you for the great work that we did together on this project. And to everyone watching, thank you, and with care.
Thanks, Kim. Bye, everybody.